For those of you just joining us, welcome to this online information webinar. Today we will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on your residence in Slovakia. Please note that if you are a citizen of any EU member state, the information included in this webinar doesn't refer to you, but it is applicable only to nationals outside of European Union. Today's presenters will be Lydia and Maria, legal consultants from IOM Migration Information Centre that is providing you this webinar. Therefore, let me start by briefly introducing our center. MIG was founded in 2006 in Bratislava. Its aim is to help foreigners to integrate into the Slovak labor market and society. We offer our services to non-EU nationals who have been already granted a temporary, permanent, or tolerated residence, or who wish to apply for any of these types of residence in Slovakia. Other beneficiaries of MIG services are Slovak citizens helping foreigners or employers of non-EU nationals, and we cooperate also with communities of migrants through our cultural mediators. Migration Information Centre offers free legal counseling regarding residence, employment, business, citizenship, and other relevant legal issues. Moreover, MIG provides free employment and social counseling, so if you are looking for a job, our experts can help you with editing your CV, prepare you for a job interview, and provide overall support in mapping the Slovak labor market. If you are looking for educational or retraining course, we can offer you a financial contribution, provided that the course will help you find a new job, improve your current employment or business. Migration Information Centre is also well known by providing open courses of Slovak language and social and cultural orientation. Now let's move to the topic of this webinar and let's talk about types of residence in Slovakia and the impact of COVID-19 on them.
So let us start with a short overview of the available types of residence. If you wish to live in Slovakia, or if you're already living here, you will most probably have either a temporary or a permanent residence. The temporary residence is linked to a specific purpose, such as business, employment, or studies. What does this linkage to a specific purpose mean? It means that, for example, if you have a temporary residence for business, you cannot be employed, or if you have a temporary residence for employment, you cannot be an entrepreneur. However, some kinds of residence allow you to conduct several activities. For instance, a temporary residence for studies allows you to study, conduct business, and work for up to 10 or 20 hours weekly. Or you can study regardless of the type of residence you have. As for the permanent residence, you can obtain one of the three subtypes of it: a permanent residence for 5 years, permanent residence for unlimited period, or a long-term residence. You can obtain the permanent residence for 5 years mainly if you're married to a Slovak national. The permanent residence for unlimited period follows this permanent residence for 5 years and can be applied for after 4 years. The long-term residence usually follows the temporary residence and can be applied for after 5 years of uninterrupted residence in Slovakia. Unlike the temporary, the permanent residence is not linked to a specific purpose and allows you to work, conduct business, or study. Since the start of the pandemic, there have been some changes in the operation of the foreign police departments in Slovakia. Currently, as of 1st of June, the foreign police is again accepting all kinds of applications and requests. Their offices are open to public 3 times a week, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Moreover, it is again possible to book an online appointment when planning a visit to a foreign police department.
The Slovak Parliament has approved an amendment to the Act on the Residence of the Foreigners, which is dealing with issues in connection with the spread of the COVID-19 disease. The amendment is in force from 9th of April. It defines a crisis situation as an extraordinary situation or a state of emergency declared in connection to the COVID-19 disease. A state of emergency ended on 13th of June 2020. However, the extraordinary situation declared on 11th of March 2020 remains in place. Therefore, the rules set by this law change are still applicable. So let's recap most of them. The amendment solves some ongoing problems faced by non-EU nationals without the residence in Slovakia, as well as those who have already been granted the residence in the Slovak Republic. So if you entered Slovakia legally, it means with a visa or based on visa-free regime, and you are not granted the residency, you are authorized to stay here until 1 month after the revocation of the crisis situation. If you are a holder of temporary, permanent, or tolerated residence that is expiring during the crisis situation, or even within 1 month of the situation being revoked, you don't have to worry. The validity of your residence will be extended until 2 months after revocation of the crisis situation. As my colleague mentioned, the foreign police is now working in normal regime and they are accepting all kinds of applications. But if you are currently abroad and would like to submit application for renewal of the temporary residence or application for permanent residence for unlimited period of time, you should be able to do it at the Slovak diplomatic or consular mission abroad. If you are interested in this option, I suggest to contact the Slovak Embassy or Consulate General first to make sure that they will accept your application. If you decide to submit your residence or renewal application after the crisis situation is over, the foreign police will be able to accept the required documents even if they are older than 90 days. But only as long as they were not older than 90 days during the crisis situation and you didn't leave Slovakia before the submission of your application. Those of you who are holding a temporary residence for the purpose of doing business and will be submitting your renewal applications next year, you are not obliged to meet the requirement of minimum income or profit for this year. You just need to submit an affidavit stating that your business activities have been affected by the crisis situation, along with renewal application and other necessary documents. As you surely know, foreigners with granted residence in Slovakia have certain obligations that they have to comply with in specific deadlines set by law. The amendment has affected also a majority of these deadlines. We can divide them into 3 categories. Those that were extended by the period of crisis situation, those that were suspended by the crisis situation, and deadlines that were not affected at all and are still applicable. Let's look closer to the first category. If you are granted a temporary residence for the purpose of employment, in general, you have 60 days from the termination of your employment to find a new employer or to change the purpose of your residence. Otherwise, the foreign police will start with its cancellation. Almost the same applies when you are granted a temporary residence for the purpose of studies. You have 30 days since you successfully completed your final exams or your university studies to apply for temporary residence renewal or different type of residence. Under the normal circumstances, if you don't do that within these 30 days, the foreign police will begin to cancel your residence. But according to the amendment, the 60 and 30 days span is extended by the period of crisis situation. So it means that if this period has already started for you, the foreign police will not initiate the cancellation of your residence during the crisis situation because it's prolonged by its duration. Now, let me mention a few important deadlines that are suspended during the crisis situation. In the other words, that they are temporarily not enforced by the law. Under the normal circumstances, you shall submit a document on health insurance and medical report confirming that you don't suffer from any disease endangering public health within 30 days from receiving your residence card. Also, you shall report the change of your personal data, passport, and address within 5 business days. Likewise, the same 5 working days period stands for obligation to apply for a new residence card in case of the change of the data in it or in case of its loss, theft, or damage. In standard situation, if the reason for which your residence was granted ceased to exist, you shall report it within 3 business days. All of these deadlines are suspended by the crisis situation, so basically you are not obliged to fulfill them. Moreover, the 180 days period during which you normally have to enter Slovakia once being granted your does not run during a crisis situation. But keep in mind that there are certain deadlines that haven't been affected by the law amendment. Mainly, the 30 days deadline to apply for a change of your document on residence at least 30 days before its expiration. Also, your obligation to be present at the territory of Slovakia for more than half of the time of your granted residency in calendar year is not affected by the law change. It means that your absence is counting towards this deadline despite of crisis situation. Additionally, the amendment waived certain duties set by the law on the residence of foreigners. Until the revocation of a crisis situation, you are not obliged to leave Slovakia within the deadline set in the decision on administrative expulsion. Likewise, if you remain in Slovakia because you were provided institutional emergency healthcare or because of quarantine measure, you don't have to leave within 7 days of losing the reason for being allowed to remain. Moreover, if your baby was born in Slovakia or any EU member state, and you as a parent didn't manage to apply for a baby's residence, you don't have to ensure the departure of your newborn within 90 days after birth. As we mentioned before, the foreign police is currently working in normal regime and they are accepting all kinds of applications. But let us now mention in detail most frequented legal issues that you might be currently dealing with regarding your residence in Slovakia.
As I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, the temporary residence is always linked to a specific purpose. However, that doesn't mean that if you come to Slovakia for one purpose, for example, to study, you can never change it. On the contrary, at any point of your valid residence, you can apply for a change in the purpose of your stay. This can happen, for example, once you terminate your studies and you decide to start working, or after being employed for some time, you decide to open your own business. When applying for the change in the purpose, you need to submit a new residence application. Remember, it is a new application for residence, it's not a renewal application. And you need to submit it at the Foreign Police Department in person. Together with your application, you will also have to submit all documents relevant for your new purpose of stay, except for a criminal record statement if you already submitted it. Your residence in Slovakia remains authorized until the decision on your application is made. The temporary residence is always granted for a specific period, depending on the purpose you are applying for. The residence can be granted for a maximum of 5 years for employment, a maximum of 3 years for business, or for a maximum of 6 years for studies. These time limits are not final, and if you wish to stay in Slovakia after their lapse, you can apply for the renewal of your residence. Your renewal application can be submitted at the Foreign Police and, according to the latest law change, also at the Slovak Embassy abroad if you are out of Slovakia during the crisis situation. Despite this legal change, it is necessary to mention that many Slovak embassies are still working in restricted mode and have suspended their services. So as my colleague already mentioned, we recommend you contact the particular embassy or check their website before a planned visit. The renewal application must be submitted again in person, which means that you cannot authorize anyone else to apply on your behalf. It is necessary to apply for renewal no later than on the last day of your current temporary residence validity. Once you have applied, your residence in Slovakia remains authorized until the decision of your renewal application is made. Despite this, I would strongly recommend applying beforehand, some 3 months before the expiration of your current residence, so that you can smoothly transfer from one residence to another. This is especially important in case of temporary residence for employment, as if you do not have a valid residence, although you might be in the renewal process, you are not allowed to work. When applying for the renewal, it is first of all necessary to submit a completed application form and a valid passport. The police cannot refuse to accept your application, even if it's incomplete, if you submit these two. You can submit all the rest of the necessary documents later in the process. Those other documents include the proof of the purpose of your stay, a document on financial coverage, health insurance confirmation, and a proof of accommodation. When checking the exact list of documents relevant for your residence purpose, you can revert to the information cards, so info cards or info sheets published on our website. After 5 years of legal and uninterrupted residence in Slovakia, you can apply for a long-term residence. This type of residence is a type of permanent residence. It is granted for indefinite period, and it is not limited by one purpose. When counting your 5 years of residence, please remember that certain residence types only count in half of their real duration. For example, a temporary residence for the purpose of studies. So if you have been studying for 5 years, this period only counts as 2.5 years, and you will need another 2.5 years of a different type of residence to qualify for a long-term residence. Also, it is not possible to apply for a long-term residence directly from certain types of residence, like the temporary residence for studies again, or for special activity if you are doing an internship or an activity under an EU program. Applying for this type of residence is fairly easy in terms of required documents, as the law only requires you to submit a proof of sufficient resources and health insurance confirmation. As this kind of residence is granted for an unlimited period, once you have it, you no longer have to apply for its renewal. The only periodic application you will have to submit is the application for a new residence card, as the cards are usually issued with a 10-year validity. However, it is also necessary to keep in mind that even if this residence can be cancelled by the police. This can happen, for instance, if you stay out of Slovakia for 6 years or out of the EU for 12 consecutive months.
Besides the amendment to the law on the residence of foreigners that we have already discussed, there has been another important law change that we would like to point your attention to, especially those of you who are working in Slovakia. According to the amendment to the Act on Employment Services, the validity of a labor office confirmation on the possibility to fill a vacancy or work permit which would have otherwise expired during the crisis situation or within 1 month from its revocation shall be extended until 2 months after the revocation of the crisis situation. So it means that if you are working in Slovakia based on so-called single permit or based on work permit, you can continue to work at the same job for the same employer until 2 months from the revocation of the crisis situation. Neither your temporary residence nor your confirmation from labor office or work permit won't expire.
So my colleague just explained the rules on how you can continue working for the same employer during the crisis situation. But if you have a temporary residence for employment, it is also possible to change job. If you have a so-called single permit, this change must be approved by the labor office. So before you start working for a new employer, both you and your potential new employer must take several steps. First of all, the employer must report a vacancy to the labor office. Afterwards, you can submit your new employment contract or your promise of employment to the foreign police. Once the police has your new contract or promise, they will ask for the approval from the labor office, and when they receive it, they will issue a document called Additional Data on Employment, just like the one you can see on our slide. On this document, there are data on your new employer or position, and once you have it, you can start working for your new employer. Once again, this procedure is applicable only if you have a single permit, but not in case you have successfully completed a high school or university studies in Slovakia. If you'll have questions about that, feel free to ask them later in the chat.
We came to the end of our presentation, so now it's time for you to ask questions using chat. If you will be interested in our services in future, you can visit us in our office in Bratislava and Košice, or contact us at our phone numbers that you can see in front of you, or email us at mic@iom.int. Please note that in order to prevent the spread of the COVID-19, MIC provides its services currently mainly via telephone and email. All information that we discussed here and even more can be found at our webpage www.mic.iom.sk. So you can see it in front of you. My colleague successfully shared it for you.
Perfect. So as you can see on the screen, this is the website, which some of you might already know, with basic information about different types of services that our center provides. And from the homepage, you can get directly to our article on the COVID-19 related measures, where you can see advice or measures that were adopted in different areas related to the COVID-19 situation. Also from here, you can get to the article explaining the changes in the Act on the residence of foreigners, which were presented by my colleague. And also during the presentation, I mentioned that you can check the necessary documents for your applications in our fact sheets. So those you can find in our section Download under Fact Sheets, depending on the type of residence you have, either a temporary or a permanent.
Okay, so now it's time for your questions. Please write them in the chat and give us a second that we are able to read it. So there is a question from Veronica. Could you please clarify the crisis situation state of emergency revocation? So as I mentioned, the crisis situation is defined as an extraordinary situation or a state of emergency declared in connection to the COVID-19 disease. State of emergency ended on 13th of June 2020, but extraordinary situation that was declared on 11th of March 2020 remains in place. We are not able to say now when it will be revoked, so I would suggest to follow our webpage or webpage of Ministry of Foreign Affairs or official webpage for Corona to see updates and to find out when it is over.
Another question from Iradovic. Foreign police never issued a confirmation of temporary residence to me or my company. Therefore, I can't cross the border at the time. Is it possible I'm registered in the system and still can cross, as I did receive an email from the foreign police that my temporary residence was in fact approved? Well, the answer to this question is yes. The foreign police, the border police, can see in the system that you have been granted a residence permit or temporary residence. But traveling to Slovakia might be complicated depending on the country from which you travel. So for example, if you travel from Ukraine to Slovakia, you don't cross any other border, just the Slovak-Ukrainian one. So it's fairly easy for you to come to the border and tell to the border police that you have been granted a temporary residence. And they will know that you're telling the truth, that your residence has been already granted, and they can let you in. However, if you're coming from a different country and on the way to Slovakia, you'll have to cross some other country, then it might be more difficult because other border police of other countries, it might be between your country and Slovakia, do not have this information. So unless you have a valid residence card, for example, it might not be possible for you to cross their borders.
Next question from Tolga. We wanted to make an online appointment, but we got an error. When we try again, the system warns us you already have an appointment warning. I emailed for help, but we couldn't get an answer. What can we do for this? So unfortunately, we received many complaints like this regarding online appointment system from foreign police. Our advice is to contact the foreign police. Maybe you can try to call them or go there in person, because we are not in charge of this online appointment system, so we are not able to give you any other advice as to contact the foreign police and ask them directly.
Hello, Marco. You wrote us a question about driving a car in Slovakia, and I saw you were still typing something, but this message did not come yet. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that we're not specializing in driving cars in Slovakia, so I do not have reply to your question. That's why you might contact a driving inspectorate, a department of the police that is in charge of driving to answer this question of yours.
All right, so it seems that there are no questions left. Maybe we will wait a few minutes. Maybe somebody will ask something, and if not, we will close today's session. So please, if you have any questions, please write them in a chat. All right. So another question from Isidora. Could a work contract be enough to prove my purpose? So if you would like to apply for temporary residence for the purpose of employment, you need to submit an employment contract or promise to employ you from your future employer to prove your purpose. So yes, your employment contract will be enough. Of course, along with other necessary documents when you are applying for temporary residence for the purpose of employment.
I'm not completely sure that was the question. Maybe the question was, let's see, let's just read your additional comment. Yeah, if you didn't submit your application, so I will read the question. I just wasn't able to do my biometrics for the residence card, so I can't prove I have the permit. Yes, if you didn't apply for your residence permit at the foreign police, if you applied at the Slovak embassy, that's true. As you didn't submit your biometrics, you will not have a residence card yet. You will first have to come to Slovakia, visit foreign police department, submit your biometrics data, and only afterwards the foreign police can can issue a residence card for you.
Second question from Tolga. Can we still go early and take the line for apply? Of course, you don't need to use only online appointment system, but you can go without an appointment, go early, take the ticket, and wait in the line. So the answer to your question is yes, you can go and take the line for apply. You're welcome.
Well, additional question or comment. I understand that they just never confirmed that I was granted the permit, as they did to my colleagues. There is one more person with the same issue. We tried with embassies and foreign police emails, but no luck. Our consul also tried, but nothing. Normally, when you are granted a temporary residence, the foreign police doesn't issue any decision. They just issue a card, and also they issue a letter which states that you were granted a permit. Maybe that's what you have in mind, that it's normally issued to applicants, sent to their address in Slovakia, and also sent to either an employer, but also it's usually sent to the embassy where you submitted your application. So if you did not receive that letter and you applied for the residence via embassy, I would maybe recommend contacting the embassy again and try to obtain that letter from them, because yes, that it should have been issued. It is normally issued to people with granted residence. Call them hundreds of times and nothing. Well, yes, I'm very sorry to hear that, but unfortunately there is nothing we can do in this situation. The only recommendation that we can provide is to ask them and call them again and again.
Okay, so good from Reza. Good evening. Is there any limitation time for paying a yearly tax 2019 for prolonged temporary residence permit? Regarding taxes, I would advise to contact the tax office or financial office or financial administration of Slovak Republic, because we are not tax experts or accountants, so I cannot tell you or answer this question. For prolonged temporary residence permit, so the amendment mentioned only if you are going to renew your temporary residence for the purpose of doing business, and you will be submitting your renewal applications next year. You are not obliged to meet the requirement of minimum income or profit for this year. So it will be applicable next year, not this year, for taxes from last year. And for other questions regarding taxes, as I mentioned, please contact the tax office and they will be able to answer your questions.
Marco is asking, I have a contract for an apartment for an indefinite period of time and also an employment contract for an indefinite period. Can I separate a work and residence visa? In most cases, the temporary residence for employment works as a single permit. So it covers both the residence and the employment. You have just one card and you don't need any other work permit to be able to work. So they are not separate. They are all together under one permit. Only in specific cases, you would need a work permit for your temporary residence for employment. If you were, for example, a sailor, or if you had a temporary residence for family reunion, during the first 12 months of your residence, you would need a work permit. Those would be two separate permits. But in most cases, if you have a residence for employment, the work permit is kind of included in this, so it's not separate, if that was what you asked.
All right, so I don't see any other questions. Maybe we will...
I can just see that Marco is still typing
Oh,
something. Maybe there
okay.
will be some addition.
All right, so we will wait definitely.
Yes, but I have problem to rev that because a lot of unemployed Slovakians. Well, the consent from the labor office for the purpose of your residence application can only be given if the conditions set by the law on employment services are met. And as you know, the labor office can give a negative answer, so not grant a consent, if the labor market situation is such that there is a registered unemployed job seeker in the register. And in that case, the labor office is authorized by the law to give you a negative confirmation. And once the labor office gives you a negative confirmation, then the foreign police cannot renew your residence permit or cannot issue a new additional data on employment for you.
Question from Fernando. I saw early that you mentioned single permit for employment has a limit for 5 years, but whenever we did it, the maximum time we could get is 2 years. Is there a reason for that? So temporary residence for employment may be granted for the foreseen duration of employment, but maximum period of 5 years. So if your contract, employment contract or promise to employ you was for 2 years, then you were granted temporary residence for the purpose of employment for 2 years. There is a maximum period of 5 years, but it is granted for the foreseen duration of employment.
Yes, also single permit cannot be issued for 5 years, because under the temporary residence for employment, there are different types of this residence. One of them is single permit, which is based on the consent from the labor office, but also you can get a temporary residence for employment as a graduate of a Slovak university. In that case, it will not be a single permit, and in that case, the residence doesn't depend on the labor office confirmation. That's why the graduates of Slovak universities or Slovak high schools can get the permit also for 5 years, but the single permit, which is based on labor office confirmation, can only be granted for a maximum of 2 years, as the consent of the labor office can be granted for such duration as a maximum. Yes, Fernando, as you're right, we have a labor office confirmation and indefinite contract now. As I told you, if you are not a graduate of a Slovak university and you are not a national of the United States, with which Slovakia has a bilateral agreement on this, even if you have an indefinite contract, the law only allows the labor office to grant you a confirmation for 2 years as a maximum. I'm not sure if I'm completely clear, so just to wrap up, under temporary residence for employment, there are single permits based on the labor office confirmation, and then there are other types of still temporary residence for employment, for example, those granted to Slovak university graduates. Great, thank you. Welcome.
Question from Mustafa. In my country, Slovak embassy is closed, and how my spouse can apply for family reunion visa? So if your spouse is abroad and the Slovak embassy is closed, then probably you have to wait when it's open, when your spouse is not able to come to Slovakia and apply directly at the territory of the Slovak Republic. So you need to contact the Slovak embassy and wait until they are open and they are accepting application for temporary residence for family reunion. From Fernando, out of curiosity, for someone who has been working in Slovakia for 5 years, how hard is to apply to long term? So for as my colleague mentioned, the requirements for long-term residents are that you need to legally reside in Slovakia for at least 5 consecutive years directly prior to the submission of the application. So this is the main requirement, and then if this requirement is met, then you can apply for long-term residence.
And if you're asking about the documents that are necessary, as I told, it's not very complicated because you have to complete an application form from long-term residence, attach one picture of yours, present a valid passport, and then you need to submit a proof of sufficient financial resources and a proof of health insurance in Slovakia. There is another question about long-term residence from Mustafa. For long-term, do you need to prove language proficiency? No. In Slovakia, for the moment, there is no such requirement. We're applying for a long-term residence. You are not asked to prove any language proficiency. You don't have to bring a certificate nor pass a test. That is expecting for you once you'll be applying for the Slovak citizenship, but not for long-term residence.
All right, so it seems that there are no questions left, so we will close today's session. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions. In case you would be interested in our services in future, do not hesitate to contact us via phone or email us at email address I already mentioned, but I will repeat it once again, mic@iom.int. All information that we discussed here can be found at our webpage, www.mic.iom.sk. Thank you very much for joining us and have a nice evening.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.